So to the left, we have the TCL QM8 51G. To the right, we have the Sony Bravia 9, and below, we have the Samsung S95D. Now, the only TV missing from this comparison is the S90D. I just simply do not have enough space to accommodate for that, so unfortunately, I just have to do it between these three. That being said, though, the S95D has virtually an identical experience to the S90D. The only difference is the S90D has better, smaller highlights and slightly better contrast because it doesn't have the matte finish coating that reduces contrast and things of that nature. So there is a difference there, but again, it is what it is. Space limitations will always exist for everybody who's not a millionaire. But that being said, we're going to talk about what we can see in this comparison and also let me know what you guys think about it. But I'm going to start off by saying that the Sony Bravia 9 and the Samsung are very similar in the way that they are rendering processing in this scene. They look nearly identical, where the TCL is doing something far different in terms of color. It's the warmer of the TVs for sure, and it also has a bit in the way of posterization, and then you also have some just chroma noise that's just not beautiful, right? And those shadows in this scene, chroma noise is off the charts. Like it just is very visible. Even with noise reduction on, it does a terrible job of removing that. And a really, really dark scene with like colors on an old film like this. So that's something that, again, if you don't like, well, you kind of have your answer as far as that goes. Now again, the best processing goes to the Samsung S95D. There is virtually no noise whatsoever. It's super clear, super clean. Obviously, because it's an OLED, it has the clarity and contrast advantage. Samsung is really just pulling ahead here. We can pause here and just kind of take a look at the skin tones. Again, TCL way off the mark, just not doing it right at all. And then you have the Sony, which is the next best for, again, and this is very important because brown skin on tungsten light, this is what I found TCL to specifically struggle with, especially on the Spears & Munsell UHD benchmarking disc of 2023. There's a section in there where they match up all the skin tones, and TCL absolutely fucking failed that, right? But Sony pulled way ahead of that. Samsung pulled way ahead of that. And this is where you find the difference between processing and color and things of that nature. Now, for those who have heard my vastly negative opinion on the Sony, don't think that it doesn't have advantages or wins over the TCL. It definitely does. The point I was trying to drive home is that it's not a $3,000 television, and it's definitely not a 3 times the price point difference, which is what you end up paying for the Sony. But when we just talk about what these TVs are capable of, I mean, it's clear. In a dark scene, as you are clearly seeing, the winner in the dark scene example will be the Samsung S95D. Second place would end up being the Sony Bravia 9. TCL by far doing the worst because it cannot handle tungsten light on brown skin. And that might sound like a bit of a biased thing, but when you look at movies and it gets to those challenging scenes, that's where it falls apart quickly. Also, I don't know if you saw that, but I'll try to run it back just a little bit so you can see the text at the end here. The text on the screen dims substantially on the TCL, where on the Sony, it's just not dimming. And I think that's important to note because while, yes, there is zero blooming when you do that, it is a jarring effect where you're like, my text is very, very dim. And that's what TCL does. Sony doesn't give a damn. They're going to brighten it up. And if there's a little bit of a glow around it, oh well. And that's kind of their approach. The Samsung obviously having the crystal clear tack sharp text. I mean, it's a Gen 3 QD OLED, so you already know that's where the efficiency behind quantum dots came into play. And we're seeing that here versus the competition. I mean, this is what it is. And as I look at it, that's something that I notice. I find the TCL to be the least appealing in this example. It's falling way, way, way behind. So far, TCL is losing at the black level game in terms of, well, not black level, but low light scenes. So anything tungsten light, brown skin, low lit like that jail chamber type deal, it just won't look good. And then again, text, very weak, very, very weak on the TCL, where Sony and Samsung are pretty much neck and neck so far for that. Now, when we look at something that's more varied, this is where you start to see TCL and Samsung pull ahead of the Sony. Sony, in most every example where there's a primary color, will fall behind. The primary colors have been greatly muted down. The Samsung, by far, if anybody wants to know who the overall winner would be, it's obviously the Samsung S95D. That one is just racking far more clarity, far more of everything you'd want to see in a picture. And now the fight then goes right back to TCL versus the, again, Sony Bravia 9. The Bravia 9 is killing it with those highlights. The highlights are just beyond anything TCL is capable of producing when we talk about small, bright highlights. And that's really where you notice a lot of the wow factor of the Bravia 9. Again, you just see a lot more than, again, TCL. Like the bias lighting around the television in that example that just passed was way more dramatic on the Sony. And as we go through these examples, you're going to see it. I mean, like, again, in some examples, they're fairly equivalent. Like now, I find TCL to have far better color than what Sony has. Sony is just way too damn blue. And again, these types of examples are really what I like to show you guys. I mean, again, getting the more colorful scenes. The Sony now is falling behind both the Samsung and the TCL. The TCL pulls ahead. Surprisingly, even a little bit more ahead of the Samsung S95D in this example. It's just rendering those colors a little bit better, particularly those yellows, way better than what Samsung is doing. In terms of, obviously, sharpness and clarity, that's going to be a win for the Samsung. And again, OLED pixel level illumination is winning that out, especially when you get to those face details. It's ridiculous. It's like literally taking off a blur filter when you go from the TCL to the Samsung. And then looking at the Bravia 9, I would say from a sharpness perspective, the Bravia 9 is the closest to the Samsung in that aspect. But again, you look over in this scene now the TCL is sharper than all three of those TVs. So it's trading back and forth, and that's what's going to make this ultimately very, very difficult to nail down. Because on the one end, you want to just say that there's a definitive winner, but there isn't. And what I found with all of these TVs is that hues are very, very different across the board. So in this example, you're going to see this shade of cyan. This is one of the toughest shades to render correctly. Sony by far getting it way wrong. This whole scene on Sony, inaccurate, just not right. TCL is doing it the best because this is the way it's supposed to look. You have the rich cyan that has a greenish hue to it. That's how it's supposed to look. Where on all the others, it just looks like baby blue. That's not cyan. Cyan has never been baby blue, and I think that's something that they need to go back to the drawing board on. What I will say, though, is Samsung is killing it with the color of the kid's hair. You pick up on all the little nuances like the brown in the hair, where on both the Sony and the TCL, you don't have that detail. It's just gone completely, as if he's just black-haired, which I find very interesting considering Sony's lauded as being a processing champion. Then when we start looking at the cover details, that looks better on the Samsung. As we go under the bed, TCL has the better color of the eyes. And then again, as we look at this example, the highlight detail is just flying off of the Samsung. Though, again, when we start looking at realistically, highlight detail, mini LED to mini LED, I mean, I say it again, Sony is about brightness. TCL is about detail. The details are immaculate on the TCL, but when you look over at the Sony, they have the better highlight detail and things like that curtain at that time. And again, just going through each example and seeing what we can ascertain, it's just very clear that, again, when you look at these details, they just don't lie, right? I mean, here we are in the Nightmare Before Christmas. I think everybody knows that. I think a lot of you guys are probably gearing up to watch that this time of year, right? Well, it's September, but, you know, October is right around the corner, right? I think many of you guys are going to be watching this movie, and even when you look at it, again, TCL, immaculate details. I see so much of a cinematic picture on the TCL right now. Way more than what I have on Samsung and Sony, surprisingly. Those colors just hit, and it is perfect. And unlike the Pirates of the Caribbean scene, there is no posterization that I notice in this example. It just looks clean. And then when I look at the Sony has bright highlights and everything like that, like the lantern right here that the little mummy is holding looks amazing, but it's not touching what the Samsung S95D is doing at all on any level. Not in skin tone reproduction, not in the reproduction of the coat. Nothing looks better on the Sony Bravia 9 than the S95D. And then looking at how, again, the colors look, I would literally say, like, from a wow factor in this example, the TCL pulls ahead of all three in terms of wow factor, even more than the Samsung S95D. Then it would be the Samsung and then the Sony in terms of wow factor in this particular example and in this particular scene. which then it becomes like this ultimate game of back and forth. Like now, better highlights on the Samsung S95D. The blooming on the Sony is ridiculous right now. We don't have any blooming on the other ones. And again, I don't know what the hell you're going to be able to see on video, but there is blooming. Okay, and you can, I mean, I'll try to open up my ISO so you can see it. It's probably a fruitless endeavor. You probably can't see that, but I'll try to get it so you can see it. Okay, I don't know where you'll see it. Right about there, maybe ISO 2500. I don't like to go too much higher than that. Maybe 3200 would be the max. But again, I really don't like going that high because it's not really doing anyone justice. Essentially, if you look here, there's a bunch of blooming here and around the head of Jack. TCL is inky black, and of course the OLED is inky black. And this is where now you're seeing where the highlight difference matters, right? Yes, Sony finds those small bright highlights like the highlights on the side of the building here and on Jack's head, but by doing that you're ignoring the black background and it's getting destroyed. And because Sony has a weaker native contrast level, right, then the TCL, it's always going to fail. And now there's a difference between native contrast and contrast with local dimming. People don't ever talk about this difference, but it matters, right? Essentially, if you have a really low native contrast and then you slap local dimming on top of it, you're still going to have examples where you're going to have that gray, bloomy, ugly garbage because it's not inky black or jet black like it should be. Like, honestly, to have a really good, like, just stellar experience, you need a contrast ratio of like 6,000 to 1 natively. And then with local dimming, then you go up to like 100, 200, or 300,000. That's just how it should work. But it doesn't work that way on the Sony, and you're seeing the results of that. So again, TCL's dimming down on text looks jarring, but you can see in real content, it actually makes a lot more sense to do it that way. So we're going to put our ISO back down. Don't even remember where I had it. I'll just kind of adjust it as I see inconsistencies or things that maybe it could be raised on. Just so we balance out our scene here without getting too bright or too dark. And in this example, I think we're doing a good job of maintaining what the TVs all look like. Again, they look fine. I don't see any real issues. Sony has the brighter highlight on that moon there. Samsung obviously had the better details. And TCL has the better color, which is weird. And now they're just kind of branching off into like, what do you prefer type deal, right? And I think when that's the case, it becomes very challenging to know like which one to go for if you don't know a lot about TVs. I'll tell you right now, the Bravia 9 in this example is extremely pale. It doesn't look good, lacks contrast. Samsung is destroying both of them in the contrast department. It's a world apart. And then the TCL is then pulling ahead in terms of like color vibrancy ahead of the Sony, but not, well, kind of even ahead of the Samsung in terms of color vibrancy by a hair though. And again, it's that back and forth nature that I told you, but don't mistake color vibrancy for color accuracy, because if you look at the gradations in the sky, the Samsung is pulling ahead, showing a distinguishing quality between the different shades of blue that the Samsung that the Sony nor the TCL are doing. So again, it makes it very difficult for a lot of people that don't really know, again, a whole lot about TVs, like what to pick and what to do. So we're going to go over to our next example and see what's up. So the next example is going to be ripples of water. And again, as we look at it, now this is where I'm starting to see TCL kind of pull ahead in the highlight department. This, for example, way brighter than what we have on Samsung or on Sony. Samsung's choosing to preserve the detail now. And Sony is just flat. There's no real way to say that. I don't know if it's because the water is rippling and moving that Sony's algorithm is struggling with it and doesn't know what to do, but it lacks the highlight detail substantially comparatively to the TCL in this example, and color for sure. It looks so like just pale. But then we've been struggling with this with the Sony for a while now, and again, seeing it against two other TVs, I think it kind of makes the point clear, right? Like the Sony doesn't have the best of the highlights all the time or the best of the color all the time. It just trades back and forth depending on what you're looking at. And so this is really going to be highly dependent, right? Your decision, that is, on what you walk away with is highly dependent based on, again, you know, what you're looking for. Because again, I lowered down the ISO here to where we had it. And again, when you do that, I think right about there, I mean, you can clearly see the TCL has very similar contrast to what the Samsung has in a lot of the examples. And the Sony is just way too open for shadow detail. And that's with me lowering the shadow detail to 37, like the black level to 37. It's just really, really off. And again, you're going to hear a lot of different stories from a lot of people, and I'm not here to speak to those, but I'm showing you my results and showing you the content you can use. Again, if you have the Wonderful World of Wonder calibration disc, you can see exactly what I'm seeing, and it's very, very telling. Again, though, TCL really, like anytime there's a really, really dark shadow that's pretty much black, it's like a 5% black shadow, they struggle with some intense like crushing and like posterization, and it just does not look good in that example. And I just don't like what they're doing with the shadows. I think it's disgusting. Sony pulls ahead in that regard. Now again, this doesn't represent the overall, but you get a pretty decent idea. Now in this scene, the Sony is just way too damn blue. The Samsung is bang on, and the TCL is slightly greenish, but again, it can pass skin tone wise. It's okay. Again, you'll kind of get the sense of what's going on here when we see the clouds. Again, you can see that, again, it's supposed to have warmth to it. Not everything is supposed to be blue and cold and dead and lifeless. Again, I don't know what the direction of Sony is, but they have definitely missed the mark with this particular example, losing to TCL and Samsung in this example. Okay, so now we're going to go into the next thing, where now we're going to look at, let's say, I don't want Wally, it takes too long to load. We'll use this as an example, just a stock retail loop again. And again, the highlights on the Sony Bravia 9 now, in this example, way exceed anything on the Samsung and on the TCL. And you can look at the popcorn, you could look at the table, I mean, you can look at the guy's face. I mean, but there's kind of in lies the problem. If you look at the guy's face, his face is so much more pale than what we have on the Samsung and on the TCL, where they're choosing a more cinematic light that doesn't favor just the highlights. And I think, and examples like that, that's where the Sony Bravia 9 tries too hard to be OLED by finding areas where they can brighten up like bright highlights and kind of cheese it a bit to try to be like, oh, look, see, we're doing the OLED thing. We're giving you the small, bright highlights, but it's not intelligent enough. It's just kind of like any small, bright highlight. You don't just juice that up. You look at what's surrounding it, and I think Sony needs to maybe issue a patch to fix that. But again, as you're clearly seeing from a color advantage, it's very clear. The other two have spades more contrast, spades more clarity. I mean, like, it's just ridiculous. Now, look, when you look at facial details like this on the Bravia 9, you're like, oh my God, the skin tones on the Bravia 9 are way more accurate. No, they are in very, very tungsten lighting here. And when you have very, very tungsten lighting, faces are going to look orange. And I don't think people realize that when they start trying to make opinions about televisions as well. And again, just look at the general scene of the overall footage here. Again, you're seeing it in real time. You're seeing what it looks like. Look at the skin tone of that. Again, it's gonna be like really hard again to pick like a definitive winner because everybody's taste is different. But based off of what I'm seeing here, and like here are my measurements, right? Like my metrics for what I value. I value the shadow detail. Do we see posterization? Do we see proper detail? I value bright highlights that are placed accurately. Are we seeing that? Color saturation, but also accurate gradations from one color to another on the spectrum of color. And then I also value the points where, again, are we having for mini LED, decent local dimming performance? Again, it's a whole total cumulative experience. And I can say, hands down, the winner would have to be the S95D. By far, that's the absolute winner between all of these TVs right here. And now, in terms of brightness, which TV would I say would be the winner in brightness? I would have to give that win to the Sony Bravia 9, just simply because the Bravia 9 does not give a damn about accuracy. They're just blasting brightness out. And for global brightness, if that's all you care about, yeah, this is going to be the brighter TV because they don't care about dimming down and preserving detail. That's just not Sony's direction this year. In terms of motion processing, I know that's something every year that people worry about and wonder about. I'm honestly going to have to say I would give the edge to the Sony Bravia 9. The motion on the Bravia 9 looks really good. The Samsung motion is good too. It's just literally, and I'm not joking, a hair behind what we have on the Bravia 9. So, but I know, again, for those who want the best motion, you're going to do that. Now, as far as gaming goes, again, I've made my statement that, again, the Bravia 9 is not going to beat most of the competitors, so I'll show you that now here, and now we're going to switch over to the HDR comparison because all this is SDR, so that's the first half of it. Now, let's go to a different use case for HDR users. Now, in the interest of fairness, we are in Borderlands 3. I've been using this throughout the entirety of my comparison between the Bravia 9 and TCL, and so now adding the Samsung to the mix, we're just going to talk about what we're seeing here. And the first thing I can tell you is that at a glance, they look very similar with some hue differences here and there. So we're going to have to dive into actual gameplay to show you a little bit more of a difference. TCL right now pulls ahead in terms of color instantly on this shade of pink in terms of, again, what Bravia 9 and the S95D are doing. And again, this is HDR for anybody wondering. And as far as the brightness and the highlights now, the TCL it's pulling ahead right here in this example, as you can clearly see. We're just going to look at some of the colors here in the sky and just talk about what we're seeing here. TCL is preserving details brilliantly, but the Samsung S95D, don't know how well you can see this, maybe turn my ISO down just a hair. The S95D by far is killing it as far as like three-dimensionality, detail, color. Not much in the way of brightness comparatively to the mini LEDs. Sony, again, on this example, has the slightly better highlights, kind of, not really, because Samsung is like literally right there. So we're gonna have to get into more diverse scenery, but in this example, the colors look better on the Samsung S95D. I'll try to open it up so you can see it. Probably can't see it very well. I don't like using auto ISO. I like rather just doing it by hand and adjusting as I go, just so you can get an idea of what everything is. Okay, so let's just get into some actual gameplay here. I'm going to try to fight this boss that I literally cannot beat to save my life. So I'm going to die a bunch of times, but that's okay. And he's going to charge me straight away. And you guys can get an idea of what the colors look like. Immediately, again, the S95D has the best highlight placement. It's giving the most amazing contrast in HDR that, again, the Bravia 9 and the S95D, or rather the TCL QM8 51G just aren't giving. And I think that's really unfortunate, but it is what it is in that regard. In terms of the quality, though, I will say that, again, TCL is catching my eye a lot because of how vibrant it is. I'm looking at the Samsung. Again, it's all about like which one can really make you feel the immersion of HDR more. Where is his crow at? I have no idea. I'm gonna die. But you guys get the idea. I mean, I don't know. TCL really is capturing a lot more of my eye here because of the brightness and the balancing. It just looks really good. Like that TCL for HDR, like it's no freaking joke. Though it's the detail on that Samsung that like it's euphoric. That's the only way to describe HDR on the S95D for gaming, like literally euphoric. Like running through here, seeing the brightness of the fire, I'll just walk up to it. I mean, like it's so pure and so clean, and the detail is so amazing. Where again, the other two, not so much. And between the other two, they're virtually tied. TCL has the better fire. Sony has the better background on comparatively between the two of those. So I mean, they're tomato for this example. But again, as I look at this, it's just crazy because like you can see, like it's a world of difference. I can tell you that. And when you look at what it doesn't offer, it's kind of confusing, honestly, as to like why TVs have so many differences and they can't just one size fits it all and just be done with it. But yeah, we're gonna die again. The black and white, by the way, looks better on the S95D. Far better control over the grayscale. And again, colors as a result just look generally better. It's not that the other two are bad though. I mean, again, Sony has amazing small highlights. TCL has amazing detail and small highlights. And I don't really think anybody was ready to admit how close TCL would be to these literally like high-end televisions. Like, you don't really go much higher at the consumer level for OLED TVs or even like premium mini LED TVs than the Bravia 9 or the Sony or the Samsung S95D. And the fact that a TCL can hold its own is impressive and a testament to TCL's, creation here. I think they've done a great job. I don't think anybody can really rob them of that, because just looking at what we have here, it really does look very stellar. Again, TCL's brightness and the clarity coupled with that brightness is really impressive. And I think anybody who would sleep on TCL this year would be very foolish, because what they've accomplished is very impressive. And I look at the Bravia 9, and I just don't feel that same HDR impact, or like it's as good at all. I feel more like it's okay. But the Bravia 9 by far in HDR is the least captivating. I would say I remember even the A95L being like a downright magical experience for HDR, especially while watching Transformers. But the Bravia 9 is just not, it's not giving me that. And I don't think you'll find a very magical experience either if you've owned either of these televisions either. Especially because if you look at the color coverage, or you measure it, or whatever you do, it's very clear the Bravia 9 has significantly less color than it's supposed to have. It only covers, what, like 95% of the DCI-P3. It should be at 99 to 100%. And then it also is doing an abysmal job when we talk about the BT2020, and that it only covers like 79% of the BT2020, which is ridiculous considering for HDR you want to usually be a lot higher than that. You know, we've got 90% of the BT2020 on the S95D, and then for the TCL QM8, I forget what it is. I believe we're like, and then like close to like 89ish. I don't know. We're in the high 80s, I believe. I'm not sure. I don't remember. I test too much, but you get the idea. It's just the color coverage is weaker. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to continue to die a bunch of times because I can't defeat this foe to save my life. So what I'm probably going to do instead is probably just go back to Sanctuary, you know, because I can't win this fight, and I can acknowledge that. So I'm just going to go back to the home that they make you fast travel to in the game, and we're just going to walk around there. You can probably see the depth of the S95D immediately. If not, you will. TCL's fallen behind in this example as far as contrast. And we're just going to keep it going by running around and seeing what we see. I will say, though, TCL is the cheapest TV here, though, the most affordable. And for being the most affordable, it is throwing punches right there with the heavyweights. Not quite beating them in the HDR example now here. Again, like if I go over to this machine, what is it, Samsung S95D, again, with the beautiful highlights, just doing what neither of the TVs can accomplish. And then the Sony Bravia 9 is coming closer than what we had in our initial comparison, but again, it's not beating the S95D. TCL now doing the worst by comparison, as you can clearly see, far more hazy than what the Bravia 9 was able to get to. So again, for those who think I'm just being unfair to Sony, I've been doing active tuning on the Bravia 9 to try to get it, again, as good as we could humanly get it. And again, in certain examples, it does do a good job in terms of color and everything. It does a good job where it can. I think that's the key here. All these TVs are basically just doing what they can. But ultimately speaking, again, the winner for HDR is going to be the S95D. Even though it doesn't have the best global brightness, if you look at these highlights, they pop off the screen in a way that they just don't on the Bravia 9. They look hazy. Look at that haze on the Bravia 9, the sharpness on the Samsung, the color accuracy, all of it just looks gorgeous. And again, it's that true contrast control on the S95D. Light to dark, you really feel like you're looking at a high dynamic range image, not a haze fest that's opening up shadows on both these displays, honestly, the TCL and the Sony. Sony, though, is doing a little bit better, though, in this example. So, again, they trade back and forth, entirely way too close for comfort, entirely way too much for my opinion, at least as far as, like, the price point. But, you know, if I only had $1,000 knocking around, I'd no doubt run to a TCL because that makes the most sense. It's like the most common sense right now. I will do my best. I know a lot of people are like, yes, but I want to see the 65-inch Hisense U8N. I'll do my best to try to get that in to see comparatively against the TCL and the Bravia 9 if it's like worth it. I will say though that again, if you have any kind of money knocking around close to $1,000, save the extra 500 bucks or so, and get yourself a 65-inch S90C, or S90D rather. That is honestly the smartest move you can make because it looks the best out of literally everything. And that's just me being honest with you. I don't, again, have it set up here because I don't have space to have it set up here. Again, I don't live in a mansion. I'm not a multi-millionaire content creator, so I don't have the ability to show certain things. But what I do have is the ability to tell you the differences and show you the differences, massive differences in color. If you pay attention to the neon light and you pay attention to the blue section, literally all around here, it's just way sharper on the QD OLED versus all the others. And this is really like where I kind of come into play to tell you this is the difference between pretending to be the real deal and the real deal actually showing up. The S95D is not getting beaten in any capacity in HDR by these other TVs. It's just not. The sharpness, the clarity, the highlight placement, I mean, the gradations, the cinematic quality, it's all there on the S95D in spades. Even comparatively to Sony's absolute best this year, their flagship has no chance of beating Samsung's flagship this year, which is an OLED, which is why we're comparing flagship to flagship across the board. TCL's flagship is great, but ultimately speaking, I would give the win to the Samsung S95D. And then honestly, I would give second place, I'd have to give it to the Sony Bravia 9 in terms of the HDR experience. But then if we're talking SDR experience, then it would go to the TCL. So it again trades back and forth depending on what you're watching. So if you watch more HDR, then you're probably going to like the Bravia 9 a little bit better. And certain examples, not all. Again, as I've shown in some gaming examples, the TCL was just way more vibrant and had more contrast and more detail. But again, sitting with the Sony for endless hours trying to make it look better, trying to squeeze out every drop of picture quality, we got a little bit more out of it. Again, it's not normal to sit with a TV for the amount of weeks that I do to try to get the picture quality out of it. So I think that's also something to factor in. Most people aren't going to do that. If you want to see how these TVs are set up, make sure you join the membership. It's $4.99. I do that so that the channel can continue to get more units in and we can do more comparisons like this. But as you're clearly seeing, they all look absolutely amazing comparatively, especially to where they start. I know a lot of you guys know what that looks like. It ain't great. And it literally is a day and night transformation, especially when we start talking about the Sony. I think it's gone the farthest out of every TV I think I've reviewed in recent memory. But that being said, though, again, that's basically how it's going to be. Just a recap of your winner, S95D. For HDR, it will be the Bravia 9. Okay, let's do it again. For the category of HDR, the winner is the Samsung S95D. Second place is going to be the Bravia 9. Last place is the TCL. For the category of SDR, the winner is the S95D. Second place is going to be the TCL QM8 51G. And the last place is going to be the Sony Bravia 9. That's how this comparison has worked itself out. And that is just basically the way the cookie crumbles this time around. But if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them in the comment section down below. Thanks so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty, and until the next video, I'll see you guys later.